we've seen the Moore's law in communication. We've seen the Moore's law-like type of growth in computation. And you're anticipating we're going to see that in digital fabrication. Can you actually, first of all, describe what you mean by this term, digital fabrication?
So the casual meaning is a computer controls the tool to make something. Uh-huh. And that was invented when MIT stole it in 1952.
Yeah.
There's the deep meaning of what the ribosome does, of a digital description doesn't describe a thing. A digital description becomes the thing.
Yeah.
That's where that's the path to the Star Trek replicator. And that's the thing that doesn't exist yet. Now, I think the best way to understand what this roadmap looks like is to now bring in Fab Labs and how they relate to all of this.
What are Fab Labs?
So here's a sequence. With colleagues, I accidentally started a network of what's now 2,500 digital fabrication community labs called Fab Labs right now in 125 countries. And they double every year and a half. That's called Lass's Law after Sherry Lassiter, who I'll explain. So here's the sequence. We started Center for Bits and Atoms to do the kind of research we're talking about. We had all of these machines and then had a problem. It would take a lifetime of classes to learn to use all the machines. So with colleagues who helped start CBA, we began a class modestly called How to Make Almost Anything.
Yeah.
And there's no big agenda. It was aimed at a few research students to use the machines. And we're completely unprepared for the first time we taught it. We were swamped by, every year since, hundreds of students try to take the class. It's one of the most oversubscribed classes at MIT. Students would say things like, can you teach this at MIT? It seems too useful. It's just how to work these machines. Mm-hmm. And the students in the class, I would teach them all the skills to use all these tools, and then they would do projects integrating them, and they were amazing. So Kelly was a sculptor, no engineering background. Her project was she made a device that saves up screams when you're mad and plays them back later. And
saves up screams when you're mad and plays them back later.
You scream into this device, and it deadens the sound, records it, and then when it's convenient, releases your scream.
Can we just like pause on the brilliance of that invention, creation, the art? I don't know, the brilliance. Who is this that created this? Kelly Dobson.
Gone on to do a number of interesting things. Mijin, who's gone on to do a number of interesting things, made a dress instrumented with sensors and spines. And when somebody creepy comes close, it would defend your personal space.
It's also very useful.
Another project early on was a web browser for parrots, which have the cognitive ability of a young child and lets parrots surf the internet. Another was an alarm clock you wrestle with and prove you're awake. Mm-hmm. And what connects all of these is, so MIT made the first real-time computer, the Whirlwind. Mm-hmm. That was transistorized as the TX. The TX was spun off from MIT as the PDP. PDPs were the mini computers that created the internet. So outside MIT was DEC, Prime, Wang, Data General, the whole mini computer industry. The whole computing industry was there, and it all failed when computing became personal. Ken Olsen, the head of digital, famously said, "You don't need a computer at home." There's a little background to that, but DEC, completely missed computing became personal. So I mention all of that because I was asking how to do digital fabrication, but not really why. The students in this How to Make class were showing me that the killer app of digital fabrication is personal fabrication.
Yeah, how do you jump to the personal fabrication?
So Kelly didn't make the screen body because it was for a thesis. She wasn't writing a research paper. It wasn't a business model. It was because she wanted one.
Yeah.
It was personal expression, going back to me in vocational school, is personal expression in these new means of expression. So that's happened every year since.
The course is literally called How to Make Almost Anything.
Yep.
A legendary course at MIT.
Yep.
Every year.
And it's grown to multiple labs at MIT with as many people involved as teaching as taking it. And there's even a Harvard lab for the MIT class.
What have you learned about humans colliding with the Fab Lab, about what the capacity of humans to be creative and to build?
I mentioned Marvin. Another mentor at MIT, sadly no longer living, is Seymour Papert. Mm-hmm. So Papert studied with Piaget. He came to MIT to get access to the early computer. Piaget was a pioneer in how kids learn. Papert came to MIT to get access to the early computers with the goal of letting kids play with them. Piaget helped show kids are like scientists. They learn as scientists, and it gets kind of throttled out of them. Seymour wanted to let kids have a broader landscape to play. Seymour's work led with Mitch Resnick to Lego, Logo, Mindstorms, all of that stuff. As Fab Lab spread, and we started creating educational programs for kids in them, Seymour said something really interesting. He made a gesture. He said it was a thorn in his side that they invented what's called the Turtle, early robot kids could program to connect it to a mainframe computer. Mm-hmm. Seymour said the goal was not for the kids to program the robot, it was for the kids to create the robot. And so in that sense, the Fab Labs, which for me were just this accident, he described as sort of this fulfillment of the arc of kids learn by experimenting. It was to give them the tools to create, not just assemble things and program things, but actually create. So coming to your question, what I've learned is MIT, a few years back, somebody added up businesses spun off from MIT, and it's the world's 10th economy. It falls between India and Russia. And I view that in a way as a bad number because it's only a few thousand people, and these aren't uniquely the 4,000 brightest people. It's just a productive environment for them. Mm-hmm. And what we found is in rural Indian villages, in African shanty towns, and Arctic hamlets, I find precisely that profile. So Lyngside, a few hours above Tromsø, way above the Arctic circles. It's so far north, the satellite dishes look at the ground, not the sky. Hans Christian in the lab was considered a problem in the local school because they couldn't teach him anything. I showed him a few projects. Next time I came back, he was designing and building little robot vehicles. And in South Africa, I mentioned Soshangovi, in this apartheid township, the local technical institute taught kids how to make bricks and fold sheets. It was punitive. But Chapiso in the Fab Lab was actually doing all the work of my MIT classes. And so over and over, we found precisely the same kind of bright, inventive creativity. And historically, the answer was, you're smart, go away. It's sort of like me in vocational school. But in this lab network, what we could then do is, in effect, bring the world to them. Now let's look at the scaling of all of this. So there's one Earth, 1,000 cities, 1 million towns, 1 billion people, 1 trillion things. Mm-hmm. There was one whirlwind computer. MIT made the first real-time computer. There were thousands of PDPs. There were millions of hobbyist computers that came from that. Billions of personal computers, trillions of Internet of Things. Mm-hmm. So now if we look at this Fab Lab story, 1952 was the NC Mill. There are now thousands of Fab Labs, and the Fab Lab costs exactly the same cost and complexity of the mini computer. Mm-hmm. So on the mini computer, it didn't fit in your pocket. It filled a room. Mm-hmm. But video games, email, word processing, really anything you do, the internet, anything you do with a computer today happened at that era because it got on the scale of a work group, not a corporation. Mm-hmm. In the same way, Fab Labs are like the mini computers inventing how does the world work if anybody can make anything. Then if you look at that scaling, Fab Labs today are transitioning from buying a machine to make machines making machines. So we're transitioning to, you can go to a Fab Lab not to make a project but to make a new machine. So we talked about the deep sense of self-replication. There's a very practical sense of Fab Lab machines making Fab Lab machines. And so that's the equivalent of the hobbyist computer era, what it's called the Altair historically. Then the work we spent a while talking about assemblers and self-assemblers, that's the equivalent of smartphones and Internet of Things. That's when, so the assemblers are like the smartphone, where a smartphone today has the capacity of what used to be a supercomputer in your pocket. Mm-hmm. And then the smart thermostat on your wall has the power of the original PDP computer, not metaphorically, but literally, and now there's trillions of those. In the same sense, that when we finally merge materials with the machines in the self-assembly, that's like the Internet of Things stage. But here's the important lesson. If you look at the computing analogy, computing expanded exponentially, but it really didn't fundamentally change. The core things happened in that transition in the mini computer era. So in the same sense, the research now we spent a while talking about is how we get to the replicator. Today, you can do all of that if you close your eyes and view the whole Fab Lab as a machine. In that room, you can make almost anything, but you need a lot of inputs. Bit by bit, the inputs will go down and the size of the room will go down as we go through each of these stages.